episode 15 of Biohacking with Brittany. I am so excited that you are here with me today in the beginning of September, new month, new season, I guess, coming up with the end of summer. And yeah, I'm just happy that you are here joining me and ready to listen to this episode, which is so different from what I've put out so far. So on the podcast today, we have Elizabeth Clark, who specializes in medical astrology and basically takes her health expertise and education and combines it with the earth cycles and zodiac and all of the woo-woo things that are kind of a part of wellness and health, but in a very educational and scientific way. So she does take on clients if you're interested. She also puts out a lot of great information through her website and social media, which I'll definitely link in the show notes below. But yeah, it's definitely a different episode, different type of episode. But it was really cool talking to her and just expanding what I know and realizing that there is actually so much more you can always learn and more to our health than what we see and what we feel. So let me know what you think of this episode. I am happy to always provide different perspectives on biohacking and health. That's kind of the point of the show. So let me know if there's anyone you'd love me to reach out to. I'm always taking on new guests now. Yeah, and I'm happy to just meet new people. So let me know what you think, and thanks so much. So Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here, especially to talk about the woo-woo shit that I don't get to talk about with a lot of people, and you are just so well versed in it that I'm really stoked.
Well, thank you for having me, and I love talking about this. It's my favorite topic of all time, so I'm happy to talk.
Awesome. So if you could just dive straight into your history with the medical astrology that you do, your health history, and kind of just how you got to the point of where you are right now with your practice, your clients, and your health.
Yeah, sure. So I have been dealing with chronic illness, mystery illness for the past decade or so, and I had also, for about the past decade or so, been pursuing my education and credentials to be a nutritionist. And I've always been a student of astrology, but it's always been or always had been more of a hobby. And honestly, it was a hobby that I didn't talk about in my professional sphere whatsoever, because I didn't want to lose credibility as, a health scientist or a clinician. So over, this past decade, I've tried pretty much everything under the sun to correct all of the mystery illness that was going on with me. And on that journey, I did my bachelor's in dietetics and chemistry. I did my master's in nutrition science. I did biomedical research for a year or two, and I did the dietetic internship. And I had some experience in between there with prenatal and pediatric nutrition. And at some point, I got really interested in epigenetics. And after a while, I started to kind of realize that this was the same language as astrology. And I hadn't really developed, my idea about that fully until I had finished my master's. I had, taken a proper epigenetics class and a couple of semesters of molecular biology and a couple of semesters of bioenergetics. And I could really understand the basics of epigenetics, not just, the methylation pathway kind of mainstream skimming the surface of it. And I eventually did heal my mystery illnesses using epigenetics and bioenergetics. And I focused mainly on PGC1 alpha, the self-healing mechanism. Everybody has this gene and it produces a protein called PGC1 alpha, and it controls your metabolism, how you age, your blood sugar, your circadian rhythm, all of the good stuff that, self-healers and biohackers are really in pursuit of mastering. So I had gone through this journey of healing myself and, getting these credentials and understanding, the science behind all of this. And I was in my last rotation of the dietetic internship, and I had gotten exposed to mold again, which was really, one of my big sort of kryptonites. And I had been exposed to it for about 5 weeks before I really got sick. And the turning point for when I got really sick was watching a documentary about people with invisible kind of mystery illness and the psychological trauma that I had never dealt with from being a chronically ill person that nobody believed and, your life is just falling apart, came back up, and it activated my susceptibility to illness. And so the last 5 weeks of the internship, I spent chronically ill again. So I went through the process and healed myself again and realized that I'm never going to be healed until I focus on my subconscious and all of the things that you don't learn how to do when you're trying to become a practitioner or a clinician or whatever. And the only way I knew how to really approach that was through astrology. So I really got into more of the sort of like biohacking my shadow and my subconsciousness with astrology, whereas before it had been kind of a hobby that I used for compatibility with people and predicting things and that sort of thing, which eventually led to the realization that there's something called medical astrology. And I just learned everything I could. I practiced on my own natal chart, then I practiced on some friends' natal charts, and I started realizing that not only is epigenetics and astrology kind of the same language and the same framework, but because I understood both, I could see certain epigenetic things in a natal chart. So I started doing it with my clients, and what I was able to find was stuff that I could quantify and then actually validate with their 23andMe results and blood work and things that I had no knowledge of before looking at their natal chart. I could see these things and then confirm them in real time and then implement clinical interventions that actually worked based on partly, medical astrology. It's more of a screening tool than anything. Of course, I don't diagnose people, but it has definitely been a crazy journey to get to this point. So now what I do is work with self-healers one-on-one. I also have a fully digital program, but for the most part, what I do is one-on-one, and then my self-healers also work through the digital program as well. And I'm just teaching them the 8 evidence-based ways to activate your self-healing mechanism. I'm teaching them how to, biohack their shadow and their mindset. And I use Esoteric Herbalism. I teach them how to do self-muscle testing. And I'm basically giving them all of the science behind, PGC1 alpha, all of the hard research, but then I'm teaching them practical ways to figure out how to take what's in the research and translate it to what's going to work for them in real time on an individual basis.
I love that. And I love that you combine conscious healing, like through nutrition, like what you studied, with also subconscious healing, because that sounds like the sweet spot in your success. So for those who just don't know, what is epigenetics, just taking a step back, and what can we begin to do in order to activate that self-healing mechanism that you talk about?
Yeah. So probably the definition of epigenetics that would resonate with people would be, if you think about disease as part genetic and part environment, you're basically getting the picture of epigenetics. So we're born with the DNA that we're going to have our whole lives. That doesn't really change. I mean, it doesn't change, but we can determine which gene variants our body is using. So let's say for one gene, you have two different copies. One copy is a variant that is associated with disease, whereas the other copy of that gene is a wild type variant that's not associated with disease. Well, your environment is what will determine which one of those copies basically that you're using. So your environment will either activate disease or it will turn off disease. And in the case of PGC1 alpha, you are activating, better sleep and sort of reverse aging and all of these really, really prized characteristics for your health. And with PGC1 alpha in particular, you're really just doing a lot of things that biohackers already do, like fasting, intermittent fasting, or prolonged fasting. Ketosis actually activates PGC1 alpha. Infrared light does as well. So does thermogenesis. And there are targeted nutrients that we can use as well. And I focus on, I think, 7 different ones, but there are certainly way more than 7, things that you can supplement with that will activate PGC1 alpha. There are just 7 that have a lot of research and very few side effects.
Right. So when it comes to medical astrology with your clients and teaching them about it and working through it, what are some of the trends that you see with your clients that comes up over and over again that seems to be something that maybe not everybody, but a lot of people are currently dealing with?
Wow, that is a really good question. First, I'll say what I don't see a lot of, but expected to see a lot of. I expected to see a lot of rheumatism or, autoimmune disease. And I don't actually see a lot of that. I would say probably the number one thing that I see, and there's usually other things with this as well, but I will see a susceptibility for mineral imbalance. And it can be something as extreme as, susceptibility for heavy metal toxicity, or it could be something as common as a susceptibility for high copper to zinc ratio.
So for that type of imbalance, what would you see in their chart and what would you see as their symptoms or signs that come up?
The interesting thing about that is that just like with epigenetics, there are a lot of different combinations that will give the same effect. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I'll see a heavy Capricorn or a heavy Saturn influence. Capricorn and Saturn both rule the skeletal system, more specifically the teeth and the knees, but that's kind of what's taught traditionally in medical astrology. But what I came to realize is that all of my clients who have major mineral imbalance issues actually have very strong Capricorn energy in their chart. So they may not be a sun Capricorn, but they may have a stellium, which is 4 or more planets in Capricorn.
Interesting. So in terms of relating to the Earth and the planets and the zodiacs, what are the connections there between, like, say, your natal chart and the cycles of the Earth, like the moon and the water? Like, I know you talk quite a bit about that. So I'm just trying to connect us humans to kind of our cycles and even the feminine cycle that we go through every month with the Earth cycle with medical astrology.
Yeah, it's basically the essence of quantum physics. It is what Einstein described as spooky action at a distance. The way that the planets are shaped and their relationship to each other in space, all of this is basically based on a nonlinear system, which creates harmonic resonance. So the harmonic resonance is kind of like if you were to put some sand on a drum and then play the drum, the sand would kind of vibrate into a pattern. And that's basically what is happening in the universe all the time. It's just kind of how everything is created. So whether you believe in, whatever creation story or the Big Bang, it doesn't really matter. It is all kind of that same basic principle. So as the planets and the luminaries and everything is moving in the sky, because it is a nonlinear system, which means, these patterns can be broken down into, angles and ratios, but they're not really equal ratios, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So because of the way that all works out, we end up with something that can be translated to music. So it's geometry, but it's basically translated mathematically to the harmonic scale. And when we're looking at things in a natal chart, we're looking to see what is harmonious and what is not harmonious. And when we look at something like a trine or a sextile, if we turn that mathematical equation basically into the harmonic that it translated to, you would hear a very pleasant sound. Whereas with a square or an inconjunct or an opposition, it wouldn't sound as nice. And that's really the basis for it. It's trying to kind of quantify a sound that we actually can't hear as humans, but is existing all of the time.
Wow. It's pretty amazing how everything is so connected like that. And it's pretty mind-blowing when you have somebody like yourself describe it. And then you can kind of start to see these patterns and see these relationships that you might not have noticed before. So in terms of like, if a listener was curious about this and wanted to start to tap into these types of ideas and the subconscious for healing, where do they start? And like, what can they do today that is affordable and also like accessible to them in order to tap into this type of healing?
Gosh, I would say the easiest way to do it is to find an astrologer. There aren't very many medical astrologers. And as far as I know, I'm the only medical astrologer that also has health, science and clinical credentials. But you can also just learn, the basics of astrology, and I'll tell you, this is like my favorite resource of all time. You can YouTube what you don't know. And I guarantee there's a video on YouTube about whatever it is in your natal chart you're trying to figure out. So as long as you know some, basic terms and what you're actually looking at, because your natal chart is, just a bunch of symbols. So if you can decode what the symbols mean and, where they are in terms of their house placement in your natal chart, you can literally just type whatever you want into YouTube. You can type Pluto in Saturn in the 12th house, and you're going to find probably at least 10 different YouTube videos and 10 different articles online talking about whatever, that astrologer's interpretation is of that. And once you read enough, you can kind of come up with your own idea about what it means. And, some astrologers use more evidence-based techniques than others. You can find astrologers that have been doing this for decades and have thousands of natal charts that they've actually compared and figured out, for a fact, this occurs, in people's charts who have this going on most of the time. So yeah, honestly, Google and YouTube are really great resources for astrology. You just have to first figure out what you're looking at in your natal chart to be able to search it in actual words. And I have one course that is Intro to Astrology that basically just teaches you that, planets, houses, and the zodiac signs.
So for the natal chart, just backing up for a second, a lot of people don't know what that is. And including myself, I don't think I knew what that was until I met you. So the natal chart is basically just taking where you were born at what time and what date, and then figuring out where the planets were aligned during that time. Is that correct?
Exactly. There are all kinds of software programs that can do this calculation for you. But back when I first started learning astrology, that didn't really exist. I mean, I started when I was like a child, probably before I was 10 years old. And that's kind of before computers were really a thing. And, there was a mathematical equation that you did, but now there's software, and it just basically gives you a geometric representation of what the sky looked like on a 360-degree wheel that's divided into 12 sections.
Wow. So after this, I'm going to go do that and look at all of my different alignments to see and understand my chart at the time of my birth, because I actually haven't done that. So that's very interesting. And I'm curious to see what it says. And just because it's another way of understanding yourself. And I think as a biohacker, and like with the movement of biohacking and self-care and self-love and all these things, I think everyone is constantly looking for another way to heal and another way to almost like level up themselves and level up their health.
Yes, I agree with that so much. And I really always loved astrology because it was a way to quantify the human experience. And I've just always felt like there were so many things I didn't understand about my nature and about other people's nature. And I could always look to astrology for an explanation. And it really takes a lot of the subjectivity out of it. You stop looking at people as like good or bad or mean or nice. It's just, you're not interacting in a harmonious way with their frequency. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one of you is wrong and the other's right. You're not compatible on, just a frequency level.
And that's normal. It's okay.
That's totally fine.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear your opinion on monthly horoscopes then, because a criticism that I hear a lot of horoscopes is that most of the time they're so general that they can apply to anybody. And so therefore, you read it in your newspaper or whatever online, or your, I guess, like Instagram now, and you read it and you're like, oh, that's me. But like, really, that could be 10 people. Right. So what's your opinion on that? And like, is there any sort of real basis to what these people are saying?
I mean, it's just a kitschy kind of thing. If you really think about it, everybody has representation of every single sign in their natal chart. Each of the 12 houses is ruled by a constellation, and whatever constellation is ruling whatever house is determined by your time of birth. That's why time of birth is so important. So you have 30 degrees in each house, and roughly 30 days in each sign. And so, you may not be a sun sign Sagittarius, but the horoscopes are written for sun signs, So even though you're not a sun sign Sagittarius, you might read the Sagittarius horoscope and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so me. Well, you have something in Sagittarius. It's just not your sun sign. So, you can make it fit for sure. And, the signs all have, various things in common too. So, I mean, it's not accurate to just go by your sun sign. And a lot of people don't even identify with the description of their sun sign, because really your moon sign is what you would identify yourself as. So the sun sign is kind of, the main sign that everyone talks about. Your moon sign is sort of your emotional nature, but it's also how you view yourself. And then your ascendant, which is the last of the three sort of main signs that you have, your ascendant is how other people view you on first impression. So like, I'm a Taurus ascendant, and when people first meet me, they think that I'm kind of like reserved and shy and down to earth. But my moon sign is Pisces, which is like totally like head in the clouds and like dreamer and not at all down to earth. So I would never describe myself as down to earth, but somebody who didn't know me and just met me probably would.
And your sun sign is?
It's actually Sagittarius.
Sagittarius, huh? That's funny. Yeah, I'm going to look into it. My sun sign is a Virgo, and which has always been interesting to me. But I mean, like I said, I don't know enough about it. But I've honestly, in the last year, I don't know what it is. I guess it's just through social media and like different podcasts I listen to. I've really started tuning into these types of like discussions, and I'm very curious about it now. So in relation to that, like something I hear a lot about is the Saturn return, especially in a female's life. So from the little that I know about it, it's usually happens around the age of like 27, I think. And it has to do with a certain, like, I guess Saturn coming around again, the earth, like listen to me talk. I have no idea.
No, you're doing a great job.
But I know it has a lot to do with like self-reflection, and it can bring on a lot of change for females. So I'd love you to just like dive into that and like educate us on it.
Oh gosh, I would love to. Saturn return is one of my favorite topics. Saturn in general is one of my favorite topics. So Saturn is the last planet visible to the naked eye. So for a long time, we didn't know there were any planets past Saturn. So ancient civilizations, even before religion existed, had a really prominent idea about Saturn in their rituals for fertility and basically all kinds of things. I mean, Saturn's symbol is kind of like the Christian cross, but with a tail. So, this existed before religion. So Saturn is like, to me, just like this huge influence on civilizations going back tens of thousands of years. But Saturn takes 30 years to make a full orbit. So it will be roughly 30 years before Saturn reaches the exact same degree it was in the sky when you were born. And that is your Saturn return. You have sort of a window of time, though, because Saturn moves so slowly, you have about a 4-degree orb. So let's say you were born with Saturn at 8 degrees of Capricorn. Well, you have 4 degrees on either side of that where Saturn can transit and it's still really affecting you, which translates to about, 1 to 3 years. So most people's Saturn returns do start around 27 and end around 30, but I've seen some people whose Saturn return was less than a year. And Saturn has sort of this rap for being the tough taskmaster of the zodiac. So, whether you impart a masculine or a feminine energy to Saturn, and really, according to ancient civilizations, it actually has more of a feminine energy. So it would sort of be like the grandmother who's like giving you, the tough advice that she's learned through her experience that you don't want to hear, and you're not going to listen to it, and you're going to find out the hard way. And that is the essence of your Saturn return. You go into it as this 20-something-year-old who, has been told that the world is a certain way or whatever, and you're going to find out for yourself. And you're just given these obstacles that you have to grow and evolve through to become, the next version, I guess, of yourself. And it happens every, 30 or so years. So you have a midlife crisis, which is also a Saturn return. And you really come out of it a completely different person than you were before, because you go up against things that you've never been up against before. And it's meant to alter who you are as a person.
So much to look forward to. So if you are currently in your Saturn return, like how would you know it? Like how would you be able to differentiate it between, just maybe a hard few months compared to something that's like so change focused, like the Saturn return?
You really don't realize it until, in retrospect. I mean, there are calculators. You can just Google, find out what your Saturn return is, and it'll tell you it starts at this date and it ends at this date. And, I didn't know that until after mine. But when I looked at it, it started when I started grad school, which was absolutely the worst and most challenging experience of my life. I grew a lot from it, but it ended the month that I had ended my first major treatment program for all of this mystery illness, where I actually felt like for the first time in a decade, like I was doing well and I had, figured it out and was quote unquote cured. So my Saturn return was just full of, hard lessons and disappointment. But when I look back to who I was before that, I was like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. Like I was such an idiot back then. And now all I know is that there's so much I don't know. Whereas before, you think you know a lot. And a lot of people go into their Saturn return saying stuff like, oh, well, I had a really, rough past couple of years, can't be worse than that. And it's like, that's the thing. Like Saturn return is going to change that perspective. You're going to learn after that it can always get worse.
So knowing that, like, is there anything we can do to kind of help us through it, or not necessarily end it sooner? Because obviously you can't really do that, but just kind of like healing mechanisms to help us get through that day-to-day struggle that a lot of people actually tend to go through.
I would say just knowing that it's going to pass, like just knowing that's not going to be your life forever. Like for me, like I really had this belief that I was not going to be chronically ill forever. And, before I knew it, it was over. And that's probably the best advice I have, because once you can kind of understand that it's something that is temporary and necessary for your evolution, you can go with the flow a little bit more. And honestly, that's a big part of what the Saturn return, I think, is supposed to teach you, to go with the flow and to not, not get too bent out of shape, because everything is divine timing and everything serves a purpose.
Right. So does it look any different between males and females? Like, does it appear differently, or do males and females react differently to it? Or is it like pretty much similar situation across the board?
I would say everybody's Saturn return is so unique that it would be hard for me to kind of break it into gender. But I will also say that I don't really have many male clients. So personally, I don't have a lot to compare.
Yeah, fair enough. I feel like it's a very female dominated area currently.
Right.
But
guys just tend to think that like that's life. Like for us, we're like, what's the meaning?
Yeah, that's so true. Always looking for something more, something deeper.
Yeah.
So I would love you to get into esoteric herbalism and kind of what that is and how that ties into all of this.
Oh, yeah. So when I started my first treatment program for my chronic illnesses at this doctor's office down in Florida that just so happened to fall into my lap at the exact right time, even though it all felt like horribly misfortunate, it all worked out for a reason. When I first started my first treatment plan there, I was muscle tested for, various things. And I also had about $3,000 worth of lab work done, as well. But the muscle testing was used to confirm things that lab work can't really tell us. So one of the findings of the muscle testing that really was, difficult to confirm through any other means was that I had chronic reactivated Epstein-Barr virus. So I was muscle tested to these herbs for EBV, and I did, I think it was 17 or 18 days on, then that same period off, and then the same period on. So it was 2 rounds with a break in between. And it was so game changing for me. I was doing all these other things that activate PGC1 alpha, like intravenous ozone therapy and infrared steam sauna with ozone. But really, those herbs had such a big impact on me. I had no idea that you could have chronic reactivated Epstein-Barr virus. And I had no idea that I had it. And it was so crazy to me that doing just this little like herbal protocol could have such an impact. So I later on, when I started my web-based private practice, I thought about that and I was like, I have a lot of self-healers that probably do have these like latent, chronic, viral, bacterial, fungal, parasitic infections. And, I don't have I don't have a good way to really approach that, And I was like, well, how did I approach it on my healing journey? Okay, it was those herbs. So I realized I'm a clinical practitioner now. I can probably find those herbs and prescribe them to my clients. It was just like this light bulb moment, like, oh my gosh. So I Googled it, monastery of herbs. And sure enough, if you are a licensed practitioner, you can use this. So I got in touch with the guy, and turns out it was so much more than just some herbal protocol that you do, 17 days on, 17 days off or whatever. It's actually, even though a lot of these herbs that are in the various blends have antibacterial or antiviral properties, they're really intended to work on a bioenergetic level, not just like a go in and kill everything kind of, mechanism like an antibiotic or something like that would be. And the guy, it's a one-man operation. It's an actual monastery. He's been in business for like 60 years. And it's just him and like 2 part-time employees. They pray over these herbs all day, every day, until you order, one blend or whatever. And they go and they make the tinctures and the little capsules and they ship it out the same day. And they even have these like little prayers that you're supposed to say when you take the herbs. And I didn't know any of that when I took them, and they still worked. But, it was really interesting to me that there was this whole backstory to it, and that, maybe they were working for a completely different reason than what I assumed. And I have been using them in my clinical practice, and it is like by far the biggest game changer for my clients. It's like the thing that you notice improvement from right away. You usually have a 3-day period where you feel kind of like trash. You feel pretty detoxy, and it takes 3 days to actually change the vibration of your immune system to meet the vibration that's required to fight whatever bacteria or virus the herbs were designed for. So you continue to take it, past the 3 days, because you're kind of, trying to give your body this memory of this frequency. But that's really the intention behind it, is that you're changing the frequency of your immune system to the frequency that's required to take care of these sort of latent infections.
That's amazing. I love herbal medicine. I've used it for quite a few different things. Actually, I've used it for candida overgrowth, parasites. I've used it to prevent malaria when traveling. All of it has worked. And I am such a natural health advocate myself and really, really believe in it. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about the almost like spiritual side added into herbalism. And that's something I've never heard before or seen before. And I'm very curious about it. So what do you see with your clients that comes up again, like these trends that we're talking about, where you recommend these herbs, and how effectively do they work? And if you could just kind of dive into a bit of your experience with your clients.
Sure. We do muscle testing. So I teach my clients self-muscle testing, and I do distance muscle testing. And this is where, kind of the woo-woo stuff comes in, if esoteric herbalism isn't, woo-woo enough. But we don't always have a quantitative diagnostic measure for things. And that's a problem. We can guess, but we can do one better than guessing, which is muscle testing. So, muscle testing is subjective. It's not meant for diagnostic purposes, and it should only be one piece of evidence that you use in making any health decision. So we look at symptoms and we do muscle testing, and then we can kind of, we can take a leap of faith, which is slightly better than a complete guess in the dark, and say that, you do have these symptoms, you did muscle test well to this herbal blend for, whatever. So, well, maybe you should take it. We'll see what happens. Nothing bad, is going to happen necessarily, because it's not like taking something like an antibiotic or, an antiviral. There's not really that sort of side effect from it. You're not going in and tearing anything down. So we'll do the distance muscle testing, which is where they have to give the universe permission for me to muscle test for them through my body. So I will self-muscle test, but I'm asking for an answer for them, basically. And I'll write down what I get. All of my samples are in little vials, and they're numbered, and I didn't even number them. So someone else numbered them. So for the most part, it's double blinded. I will take the ones that I got a yes to and some things that I got a no to, and then I'll take some other alternatives that could treat those same things. So let's say I got a yes to an esoteric blend that would treat a microscopic parasite. So I'll include that in this package to my self-healer that I mail them. And I'll also include a totally different treatment for a microscopic parasite. So theoretically, if they have a microscopic parasite, they would test yes to both things, and then we can decide, which is the best route for them. So I'll mail them these numbered samples, and then they'll self-muscle test, and then we'll kind of compare what results we get, and we'll figure out what the body wants to address first. Because you could get a yes to, 10 different things, but you're not going to get a yes to taking all 10 things at once. Your body is sort of like Jenga in a sense. You don't want to just pull out a random block, and you don't want to pull out all the blocks at once. You want to pull out the block that needs to come out first so that the whole system doesn't crash. So that's kind of the process we go through. Then once we've determined what they would probably benefit from taking and, what they should try first, we'll order the herbs and they'll take it. They go through a little detox period. Then on like day 4, they feel amazing and they do the break, and then they take the second round. And that should be, all that it takes, unless they go through a period of severe physiological or psychological stress and the immune system sort of, lowers its frequency. Then you may have to do another round, but you should be able to go a year or two at the very least without having to do, another round. And what happens a lot of times after you do the first round is that we can go back and re-muscle test for all of the things they got a yes to before they did any herbs, and they won't get a yes to all of those things. They might not get a yes to any of them at this point, because the immune system is elevated to a point where it can, I don't want to say fight, but it can balance, it can bring your body back into harmony. So it kind of has this like crossover effect into other areas of your, the ecosystem of your body.
That is like so thorough. I love that. And it makes sense of why it's working, because you are just helping from so many different levels. And you're also looking at the root cause of what's going on. You're not just, kind of taking the symptoms and the signs and then trying to heal that with herbs, right? You're really getting to the nitty-gritty of what's going on in your clients' health and in their bodies. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been amazing to talk to you and go like super, super woo-woo with you. Where can the listeners find you and connect with you? And if they want to book online with you, where do they do that?
Well, Instagram is the social media platform that I'm the most active on. And most people find me that way on Instagram. I'm experimental_Betty. People always feel free to DM me, and I always respond to my DM. So that is a really great way to get in contact with me and get kind of, familiar with my style. But to book like a free 15-minute discovery call or an esoteric herbalism consult or a astrology reading, you can actually go to epinutritionist.com. So it's like EPI as in epigenetics and then nutritionist, all one word. And you'll go up to the bar at the right-hand corner and you can click book online. And then you can choose, whatever you want to do. Most people will book an astrology reading and then they'll book a different astrology reading and then they'll enroll in the self-healer program. So there's a variety of things that people can do to kind of dip their toe in and see, what it's like to work with me before just committing to like a big thing.
That's great. That's a great way to get started. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really hope the listeners connect with you, and it's just been such a great time to chat, and I've learned so much from you.
Well, thank you for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
Thanks so much for listening. I love learning new information about health and wellness and anything woo-woo. I feel like I just always have so much to learn from the guests that I bring on, and I hope you guys learn a lot as well. So thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.